Alrighty, so we are here now for race 2 of the 1000 miles championship. And what that now means is I can take off the racing transmission because for this one I don't really need it. I'll keep the sports suspension on and I think everything else should be fine. We're not really changing anything, we don't have any weight reduction on this thing, so let's now get on with part 1 of race 2, where I will be running the first 50 laps here at Opera Paris for part 1, and then running the other 45 laps for the second half. I don't think this is going to be too hard, this should be pretty easy from what I can see. Yeah, 3 points. I'm pretty convinced in saying this is going to be another dominant win like it was before, where in the previous race I won by 2 laps. So here we go, as I'm already making a pass, 2 passes in fact, as I have passed both. I went too deep on the curb there, as I nearly passed both the VW Carmen Gear and the Fiat 500 right before the start. I honestly do find it ironic to say that you can actually do that in this game, where before you start you can actually just overtake the AI. A little bit of a bump there with the Honda, but as I would have expected, I'm immediately making passes on the AI as the Marcos runs too wide, trying to make sure I get a clean pass here without any contact. He gives me a bump. I think that was a secondary bump I saw there, but I did manage to pass him cleanly, which is what I wanted. So here we are then for race 2, and in, I would say, over half a lap, I have already taken the lead. And now all that's really left for me to do is just to hold on to it and basically blow out my opponents with similar pace to what I blew them out with before. In other words, I previously won by 2 laps at the Nürburgring, which is equivalent to, I would say, about 17, maybe 18 minutes. And I think for this one, I am probably going to win this by at least 7 or 8 laps. Possibly more, depending on how much faster my car is compared to their cars. I already have a big lead as it is, so it's probably not going to be too long before I start overlapping them, as I already have a 10.5 second lead and heading through the chicane and now up through the hairpin. Gotta be really deep to make it through that hairpin, and I do so quite well. And now on the back stretch once again. Hitting around 112 before heading on the brakes, and that was too fast, and oh god, yep, I knew that was coming. Well, had to happen sooner or later. I'm just glad to say it happened early enough to not be a major concern. I keep forgetting these cars do not have the stronger brakes of what the sports cars of today do. That's one thing I am trying to get planted inside my head. Although I only did this yesterday, which was on a Wednesday, I still have to remember that these are basically sports cars, mostly from the 60s. As a matter of fact, I think all of these are sports cars from the 60s, because they technically predate 1970. But I have quickly started pulling away again. Just have to make sure I do not make the mistake I made before. Although I can guarantee you that will probably not be the last. Because if I know what happens when it comes to endurance races, unless you are basically a professional esports gamer, well, mistakes are basically bound to happen, regardless of how good you think you are. And the other thing you have to remember with these cars is they normally need more of a distance to brake heading into the corners, because this is technically an era of sports cars, and also race cars I might add, that do technically predate the age of aerodynamics, as we are already 3 laps into this and I'm leading this by a long way. 22 seconds already. In spite of my second lap mistake, I have already managed to pull out a huge lead. And I can guarantee you, providing I do not make too many more mistakes after that one I already made, then I can guarantee you my lead is going to be much bigger. Because that's just the way it is. And the way I feel like my cars can just be. Probably didn't have to keep it in 4th gear there, but I wasn't wanting to downshift that time around in case if I did make the same mistake again, but I reckon because we're at a much shorter venue than the Nürburgring, this probably is going to take at least a few minutes less. I would say probably 10 minutes less at the minimum for how much less time I think this race, for how much time less I think this race is going to take in comparison to the first one. And as you can see down there, I don't think anyone is going to catch me. I'm just going to get that out the way and say it because, well, my car is simply that much better than the AI. There's no other way I can describe it. It's basically just me dominating from the ground up. And I probably need it as well, because if I didn't, then, well, this would probably not be as fun. Oh, that was a perfect entry speed through there. And I gained 4 miles an hour in that sector split as a result of me getting a deeper corner entry. I think this might be a new purple lap from what I can see. The way my car is running right now. I definitely feel like I'm going to go purple on this lap. And I do. by a second, no less. So as a result of me getting a deeper corner entry, I wound up gaining a second on my previous personal best. Which is actually pretty good. So, yeah. Also, something else I notice is the field at the moment is actually pretty close to one another. Well, except for the Fiat, of course, because, well, the Fiat is basically just idling. I think there's no way he's really going to catch up to the rest of the field. I mean, he only has, what, less than 20 horsepower? So I think you can be guaranteed in saying the Fiat really is not going to show up in this race, from what I can see. The other reason why you have to brake early is because, well, right before that right-hander there is actually a bump where you do have to really take care of the car on the way in. The track surface here isn't quite as abrasive as what it is at the Nürburgring, but you still have got to take care of the car when you head into that right-hander because of that bump that's right there on the corner entry. And you do have to tell yourself it is there. Because if you don't, then, well, you're just going to miss the turn. I should know that because I have done it a few times. So you really have got to be aware that right before that right-hander, before that section of left-handers and right-handers, and also before the hairpin right at the end, you have to tell yourself that there is a bump on the entry to that first right-hander in that final cornering complex. You basically have to tell yourself it's there, more or less, is the point I'm trying to get across. I really thought for sure I went too deep there, but thankfully I didn't. Yeah. So, I now lead by a minute, and we are almost 7 laps into this race, and I have a feeling it'll probably be just a handful of laps before I start overlapping the rest of the field, as I now break into the high 140s after 7 laps here at Opera Paris. I think when I get on the grippier rubber, that is when I am going to really improve on my sector splits. But right now, I gotta say, my pace is very solid. And it's pretty much where I need it to be at this point. Because this is probably going to be a 3-hour race at the very least, once pit stops start setting in. I know that's going to happen, because, well, this is an endurance race after all. And you just have to expect those. These tyres are never made to last forever, is the point I'm trying to get across. Oh, gone too deep. Yep, I ran wide. Thankfully, however, I did not clip it on the bus stop straight like I did before. But either way, my times are still quick, so I think we should be okay for now. I think it's probably going to be Monaco where it's going to feel longer than this. I'm going to assume my tyres are probably past their best at this point. Might also be because, well, unlike Nürburgring, this place tends to put more wear in the rear tyres than it does the front tyres. And I can guarantee that by the time we get up to the Formula GT World Championship, there will be plenty of pit stop. There will be plenty of pit stops. As we're only 8 laps into this, and already I am losing my breath. And running a little bit wide again, but not scrubbing off as much speed as I did before. You basically have got to step on the brakes as soon as you hit that bump, because if you don't, then well, you're basically going straight into the concrete. You really have got to be ready for that right-hander when it shows up. I probably have said that a few times already, but I figured I would just say it again to get the point across. And somehow, I went 2 tenths faster on that lap than I did my previous lap. So I think it's fair to say my car definitely has more pace to give on this set of boots. As I am closing in on both the VW Carmen gear and the Honda S800 just up ahead of me. The VW hits the wall. I lift off for a moment there so I can get through cleanly, and going for a little bit of an aggressive dive there on the Honda. Really had to dive round the outside, but I figured he probably would get out the way because he probably knew I was much faster. I think it's going to be around this time when eventually I do overlap the Alfa Romeo. It'll probably take another 2 laps before I have overlapped him. So I think at this point that probably means that if my pace stays the way it is, I'm probably going to overlap the field at least 6 times. Possibly 7. Depending on how strong my outright pace is. Because I can see it happening already, where I know my car is fast, but the only question is how fast. And I only lost half a tenth on that lap whilst I was clearing the back markers, but already after 10 laps I have put most of the field 1 lap down, and right now I'm closing in on the Alpha in front of me. So I think it's only a matter of time before he too goes 1 lap down. And noticing some wear on my right front tyre, but I think I should be okay at this point because I know I have at least a few more laps to do on this set of boots before I need to change them. As I run wide through the hairpin, probably because of the understeer caused by the wear on my right front tyre, but that's okay, because my lap times at the moment are still decent, which is where I need them to be, basically. And hard on the brakes again for this right-hander, and trying to see if I can clear the Alpha up the inside. There's a little bit of an aggressive dive there, but I was trying to see if I could get my foot in the door. However, that was not gonna work. And I was off on that lap by a second, but as soon as I get to the end of lap 11, I wind up overlapping him. So I think what that means is I'm probably going to mathematically win this race by, I would say, probably 8 laps, if my calculations are correct. I think it's probably going to be at least an 8-lap win, as I overlap the Fiat 500 now for the second time. And I am noticing some wear on both my right front and left rear tyres. This track surface is also pretty abrasive because, well, parts of it are technically concrete and other parts of it are, well, cobblestone. So I think you probably would expect this to be a similarly abrasive track surface to the one that we have at the Nürburgring, but because this one is shorter in distance, that's why we're able to technically get more laps in before we pit. And the understeer once again kicking in. I think I can probably go for at least 2 more laps before I need to pit. So I think that would mean that I would technically have to pit in 6 times during this race, if we can manage to go 15 laps around here. Well, I would say either 6 or 7 times. That's probably how many times I think we'll pit. But since we've already put the field 1 lap down anyway, I doubt there's really going to be much in terms of competition. And understeer is once again kicking in. I think I can probably go for another 2 laps on this set of tyres before I need to pit. As long as I don't crash between now and then, I think I should be fine. I do know my way around this course pretty well. I also know that it's not going to be too long before I will have to pit. It's hard to describe how long the pit lane is. I mean, the pit lane entry on the forward course is pretty long, but the exit is very shallow. Whereas on the reverse course, the pit entry is narrow. The pit entry is short and narrow, but the pit exit is pretty long on the reverse course. So I can probably go for another lap on this set of boots if I really wanted to. I think that's probably how much longer it's going to be before my tyres are baked. But at this point, I seem to be managing my car pretty well. And I am still continually pulling away from the Alfa Romeo that I think is just behind me. So he may unlap himself temporarily, but I think once my pit stop is done, that is when I will quickly overlap him again. And I think my front tyres are pretty much done, but my rear tyres have still got some tread left in them, so I think I'll get this one to go for another lap, and then we'll pit ourselves in. I do want to try and make sure that I am limiting the pit stops as much as I can. I think that's probably the best way to do it. Plus, in spite of me having tyre wear issues toward the end of the second lap on my soft tyre stint at the Nürburgring, I was still able to go 3 seconds faster for the whole lap than I was with my soft tyres, and I thought that was pretty interesting, in spite of my tyres basically dying towards the end. So I think my strategy from here is going to be to pit basically every 15 laps. And of course braking early because, well, and yep, I knew that was coming. Although amazingly, I did manage to avoid the wall. Although I braked early because of the tyre wear, it's pretty much a clear inclination that I need to pit this lap and I need to pit now. No penalties for crossing the pit entry line, and don't need to refuel yet, just need tyres. And so we will continue. And there goes the Alpha. I don't need to pit in for fuel yet. I think I should be good for a while yet before I need to pit in for fuel. So the Alfa Romeo has now unlapped himself, but it won't be too long before I relap him, because I have got fresher tyres than he does. I'll admit, tyre wear on this car is a bit abrasive compared to the AI, but I still think it's pretty useful to say that my ride is able to go for 15 decent ones and then basically go out and fucking do another 15 laps for basically every stint, essentially. I'm not sure how much longer my breath can keep up with this, but I do at least have a cup of juice and a bottle next to me just in case. But either way, since I am on fresh tyres, admittingly cold tyres but still fresh tyres, I would say I'm doing pretty well in terms of where my car currently stands. So we are now 16 laps into this. We still have another 79 to go at this point. And at this point, I am pretty convinced in saying that we should be able to relap the Alfa Romeo and then gain some big numbers. As soon as he pits. In other words, we'll be able to gain a foot up on the Alpha because he too for about 2 or 3 laps will probably be on cold tyres as I now re-overlap him, and that is probably not going to be the last time I do that. So I think from what I can see, I am probably going to win this by 7, maybe 8 laps. Depending on how fast my car is at the end. However, since we're at Opera Paris, we're not having to go foot to the floor for most of the lap like we were on the Nürburgring North Loop. We're basically just doing what we're supposed to be doing, which is running laps and making sure that we come together with some useful, and making sure that we come together with some useful lap times. I couldn't think about how else I was going to say that, but anyway. Our tyres are pretty much rubbered into the track now, so let's try and see if we can put in some quick ones. Or at least try to. So, yeah. Because I can do that. And because I am already pulling away from the Alpha as we speak. Around the final corner, and I set a new best lap time of a 1:39.4. So I think it's fair to say that my car has still got plenty of pace left in it, from what I can see, as I gained over a second on my previous lap time. Although partly the reason for that is probably because I did it on a lighter fuel tank. And because I know refueling is not really needed for a while, that's why I'm just kind of gaining time at the moment. I'm basically just seeing how much fuel conservation I can do in this race, and so far it seems to be working really well. Which at this moment in time is what I want. As I am now overlapping the Fiat 500 for a 3rd time, I can guarantee when it comes to overlapping the Fiat there will at least be 1 or 2 moments where I will crash because I was overlapping him. In other words, he'll basically be a backmarker that probably gets in my way once or twice, but I'll come to accept that if it happens, because it still doesn't stop me from having a huge lead up front. Which is basically what I want to see. So we're 19 laps into this, and still got another... let me think. Yeah, still got another 76 laps to go. Including this one. As we head around the memorial statue again. I think that's what that is. And up the street. And through the chicane once again. Right before the hairpin. I think that might be the Paris Town Hall we're passing there. Unless that's further down, but then again, I don't really know because I have never been to Paris. But I am steadily pulling away from the Alfa Romeo now, as I have put the Mini Marcos now 2 laps down. And early on in this race, the fight for third for most of this race so far, it's actually been pretty close. It's a lot closer than I thought it was going to be, in all honesty. But anyway, we're still running good for now, as I am well over a lap clear of the Alfa Romeo at this point. And now we have just 75 laps to go. And so we continue our prolonged domination. I don't think it's going to be too long before the VW and the Honda pit. I have basically put the entire field at least 1 lap down, and I have now put the Fiat 500 3 laps down, because he is just that slow. And through the hairpin we go, and at this point, it looks as though my lead is only going to grow. As I close in on the Honda, I managed to overlap him soon enough to get back on the racing line, and the VW Carmen Gear is just up ahead of me, so I should be able to get him, I think. Although these corners look wide, you have actually got to keep your lines tight in order to make it through. The corners are actually tighter than you think they are. And I improve with another new best lap time. This time into the high 1 minute 39.4s. So I think my fastest lap by the time I get on the soft tyres, because I will feel safer to put those on around here. I think my best lap time is probably going to be, I would guess, a 1 minute 37 possibly. Most likely a 38, but I think a high 37 might be possible, depending on how quickly I can get around this place. I do know the lap well enough to know that if you do get solid corner entries and exits, you can actually gain a few tenths at the least. I do know that, which is partly the reason why I am making sure that my entry speeds are as decent as my exit speeds. So, yeah. Also, you can actually save time by not refueling early on. That is actually something you can gain time with. If you don't refuel during these races early on. And so the VW is now in the pits, and that just leaves the Honda, who is yet to pit. Although because we're not as spread out as we were at the Nürburgring, the strategies have made things a bit more interesting. And I think that's also because the AI will technically be refueling where I won't. Which is probably also the reason why their stops might take a little longer. But anyway. Point is, we're still running good for now. And it looks as though we are going to continue gaining time on the AI. As I head through this left-hander again, on the bus stop straight, a little bit faster than I normally would, and this time hitting 109. I thought for sure I was too fast for that corner, and I almost hit the styrofoam, but somehow I was able to avoid that. And heading through this tight cornering complex again, trying to make sure I don't slide my car out wide. And we're now 23 laps in. As I've now overlapped the Fiat for a 4th time. I think there is actually going to be a point where I will lose focus of how many times I've overlapped him. Because it's just going to keep happening at this point that I won't fully be able to keep up after a while. But anyway. I'm also pretty sure that I have overlapped most of the field twice now, up to this point. Except for the Alpha, obviously. But I think that will be coming soon. Because I think it's only going to be a matter of time before that happens. So a 56.6. And a little bit wide, but still able to maintain my pace. I think I was a little bit early there on the brakes. But still proving that my tyres are probably going to last up until the end of lap 30. Which is what I aim to do. But anyway. And this time setting a 1 minute 40 flat. So 24 laps in, 71 to go. I think we're probably going to be over an hour into this by the time we get to the halfway point of the event. As the Fiat now comes in, I have overlapped him 4 times up to this point in the race. So I think by the end of this, I will have probably overlapped him at least 15 times. Maybe 16 times by the time we're done with this. I have put most of the field 2 laps down already, so I think something will happen before this is all said and done. As I now head through the left-hander once again. And once again running a little bit wide, but I think that's normal. As I now come up to this tight cornering complex to end off lap 25. Shouldn't be too long before I reach the 1 hour mark of this race. But I think by not refueling early on, I am actually gaining some time. Because it means that most of my pit stops will not take as long, and it also means that in terms of fuel conservation, I'm doing really well. Because these tanks can go a long way. from what I can see. So I think it's probably going to be up until, I would say, about probably lap 50 when I really need to refuel. Although, I will technically get myself a splash of gas for the end of the race, just in case. But because we're not burning as much fuel here as we would be at either the Nürburgring or Le Mans, that's why I think we're doing pretty well at the moment. As I am now right behind the Alfa Romeo once again. And he comes into the pits, so that's going to now give me a 2-lap lead after only 45 minutes of this race. And I think that lead is only going to continue to grow. So after 26 laps, I am now 2 laps ahead of everyone else. And now I am going to put the Mini Marcos 3 laps down, as my gap at the top is only going to widen. So, yeah. I probably have another 3 laps in this set of boots before I need to pit. These tyres can actually go a pretty long way in this car because I've proven that we can go, as I now put the Fiat 5 laps down. So I think I'm going to overlap the Fiat at least, I would say, either 17, maybe even 18 times. Because of just how slow he is. I mean, I'm basically the hare in this event. Everyone else in the field are basically turtles. And at the back, we have the snail. So basically, this is pretty much a race of the hare, the tortoise, and the snail. Except for saying that I don't need to be conservative in order to just have a huge lead. Because providing there are no mechanical failures in this game aside from tyres, I think I should be fine. As I'm now closing in on the VW once again, and going around the outside, trying to give him as much running room as possible, as I have now put him 3 laps down. So that's now most of the field overlapped at least 3 times. And the Fiat 500 up to this point has been overlapped 5 times. So getting on the brakes early, don't want to miss my corner entry. I know once these front tyres are dead I will not be able to make that corner, but I am able to manage the understeer pretty well up to this point. And since fuel is really not proving to be too much of a problem at the moment, I would say we should be able to keep going on this tank for a while yet. And I think in this race I should be able to refuel only once. Because of how well my fuel conservation is going at the moment. I'm able to conserve fuel at an impressive rate of knots, and I am also able to successfully make sure that my car is still quick. So, yeah. So up to this point of the race, the Fiat 500 is now 5 laps down. The Mini Marcos, the VW Carmen Gear and the Honda S800 are all... Excuse me. The Mini Marcos, the VW Carmen Gear and the Honda S800 are now all 3 laps down. And the Alfa Romeo at the moment is still 2 laps down. So I think it's pretty clear to say which 2 cars are clearly the fastest at the moment. And my front tyres are going away again, but I still think I can squeeze out 1 more lap. Because as long as I'm able to keep going on this set of tyres for 15 laps at a time, that would be a fine way for me to successfully make sure that my ride stays on the road. So we're now almost a third of the way there. I think once we're done with lap 32 we pretty much will be a third of the way there, but at this point of the race I am basically just fine to stay where I am. I may only gain 12 A-Spec points by the end of this championship on my A-Spec record, but I think the main thing that will happen is just relief. Basically, the relief to say that I have managed to finish this race. And also this championship. Because I gotta be honest, this championship, even though it's only 4 races, it's still a pretty long championship. And I will definitely be relieved by the time this is done. So I don't think my tyres are going to hold up any longer, so I'm just going to pit. I crossed the pit entry line once again, but that's fine, because there are no penalties in this game for doing that. Still don't need to refuel for a while yet. So I'm pretty sure this tank is going to go a long way, from what I can see. This car might be hard on tyres, but one thing I can say it's not hard on is fuel. And it does seem to manage its fuel flow pretty well, from what I can see. So we begin our 3rd stint of the race. We've stopped in twice now, and that is in the course of less than an hour. And right now, I would say we're doing pretty good. As I am now coming back to overlap, I think it's the VW who I'm now re-overlapping for the 3rd time in this race. And yes, it is. So re-overlapping the VW up to this point of the race. Putting him 3 laps down once again. As most of the field is now at least 3 laps down. Meanwhile, the Alfa Romeo is still 2 laps down. However, that's okay, because I still have a huge lead on him anyway. And that's only really something I need to worry about, no one else. So at this point of the race, I would say we're doing pretty darn well for ourselves. Because we're just decimating the field at this point with our outright speed. And so we continue to set the pace. As after this, we will pretty much be a third of the way there by the time we've completed this lap. So, I think in the general terms, this race is probably going to take less than, I would say, 3 hours, if everything goes as normal, and I continue to conserve as much fuel as I can with this thing. Something which, by the way, I am doing very well at the moment. And it feels like the fuel I am currently burning in this thing, it is nowhere near what I expected the fuel flow burn to be. So we're going to go pretty deep into this race before we need to refuel, is what me thinks. As we head through this complex sequence of corners again, and also the final left-hander. And so we are now a third of the way there. So I think this race is probably going to take me about less than 3 hours to complete, if we continue to be as quick as we are. I think the fuel flow is really going to matter for most of this race, and how long it takes for me to get through the rest of it. So I think it's probably going to be around lap 35-36 when we reach the 1 hour point of this race, and then somewhere after that, that's when we'll reach the 50 lap mark. So I think it'll probably be over an hour and a half by the time we get to the 50 lap mark, if my calculations are correct. I at least think that's what it'll be, as we've now burned half a tank of fuel. So I think it'll probably be either lap 65 or 66 when I'll need to pit in for fuel. Which, as I said before, is a good thing because it means I can go a long way on this tank, the way things are looking, without having to refuel. So it's probably going to be after the 4th stint when I'll pit in for fuel. And even after that, I really don't think I'll need much more than about half a tank, because the fuel has already done very well to last up to this point of the race. I mean, we're already 33 laps in and I've only just burned half a tank. So if you're asking me that is not fuel saving mastery, then I really don't know what is. But anyway, we're over a third of the way in terms of our distance now. And I think it's pretty obvious to me that we are going to go a long way into this before we have to pit. Because that is just how impressive it is. And there's the Fiat once again. Had to step on the brakes there for that left-hander, as I have now put him, I think, 6 laps down, is it? Or 7? Nah, this has got to be 7. If someone is actually keeping up with the lap count ticker for how many times I have overlapped the field, then I am impressed. Because you are actually keeping up with how many times I have overlapped my opponents in this race. I've definitely overlapped the Fiat now 7 times, I'm pretty sure of that. So I think the Fiat 500 here is going to be a long, long way behind the rest of us. If anyone is actually keeping up with how many times I'm overlapping the rest of the field, then I will give you kudos. As we now reach the 1 hour point of the race, and it took me 34.5 laps to get here. As I set a Satan sector split with a 56 point Satan, and over that bump once again. Was probably a little bit hard there on the brakes, but still able to make it through no problem. So we're now 35 laps into this race, and we have been doing this now for over an hour. And so we have another 15 laps to go before we get to our distance marker. And so we continue to ride. Ride in our Jag. Yes, it has taken me over an hour in the video to actually say that. But either way, we are dominating in a very cool way because we're doing it in a Jag. Oh, a little bit deep there, but still able to avoid the outside wall at least. Probably scrubbed off more speed there than I was wanting to, but either way. I think at this point I have got quite a lofty advantage over the rest of the field. And we're only 36 laps now into this. We still have another 59 to go, but at this point, I'd say this race is probably going to take less than 3 hours. The way things are going right now. That's what I estimate. In terms of duration, as I now overlap the Mini Marcos for the 4th time in this race. And up ahead we have the VW hitting the outside fencing there, but not really doing too much damage except scrubbing off a little speed. As we close in on the Alfa Romeo once again, and I am now going to put him 3 laps down. So I've now overlapped the Mini Marcos 4 times, and I have now overlapped the Alfa 3 lap. I've now overlapped the Alfa Romeo 3 times in this race. I think it's the VW Calming gear that is still running in second. Then we've got the Honda S800 in fourth and the Mini Marcos in fifth, depending on what strategies they're running. Which I do find to be interesting, because, well, pit stop strategies normally do tend to mix up the running order at the end of a race, depending on what they're running. Except for saying that my simple strategy for the Enduros, when we get down to them, it will basically just be me virtually running as many laps as I can, and also making sure that I manage to successfully do most of the race on basically the hardest tyres I can use. For most of those races before switching over to the softs, and that's a wall. Is that going to affect my pace? Does a bit. But I think we're okay, as I now put the Honda S800 a fourth lap down. As I am now 1 hour and 7 minutes into the video. So I don't think we're going to have to wait too long before we get to the 50% mark of this race, because that will be about lap 47-48. But I chose to take it all the way up to 50 because I figured that wouldn't take too long. And it would also make my editing easier as well. And I don't have to worry about just staring at my computer, making sure that the vids get uploaded, basically. That's why I split these up, for just these sorts of situations. But anyway. The Mini is now in for his... I think this is now his third pit stop of the race, if I'm not mistaken. He's really not doing very well in terms of tyre conservation, compared to both the Honda and the VW at this point. It's definitely going to cause him to drop back in points, as I have now put the Fiat 500 8 laps down, and probably many more to come as well, as I did overlap him round the outside, but thankfully no damage was taken. And so we continue to put ourselves in the fastest car on the circuit mode, basically. Alright. 39 laps in, still another 11 to go before we reach our window to end the first part, and then afterwards we will just get on with the second part, which means I'll probably be somewhere in the middle of my fourth stint by the time we're done here. And that's a wall. Yeah. I would really appreciate it if someone was actually keeping track of how many laps I have put on the AI. I would really appreciate that if you could maybe give me some pointers for how many times I have overlapped the AI at this point, as I'm now going to put the Volkswagen Carmen gear, I think a 4th lap down. And I think at this point I should have this position secured. So that is now 4 laps on the VW. He was actually doing really well in terms of his tyre conservation at this stage of the event. And I went too deep. And getting some understeer off the corner exit, but that's okay because I am still running good lap times, which is what I want to be doing. As I go through the bus stop once again around that memorial, at least I think that's supposed to be a memorial. And up through this hairpin once again. Trying to see if I do still have pace. And at this point, I don't know if I do. So a 58.3 is what I have in this sector split. I almost thought for sure I ran too wide there for that corner, but I just ran wide enough to stay out of trouble. And I do the same through the right-hander as well. So most of the field is now 4 laps down after 41 laps here at Opera Paris. And at this moment in time... Oh, shit. Okay. It's alright, we're fine. We're still moving as we should. So... we are now on our 42nd lap. And I am undershooting a lot of these corners at the moment. Okay, I need to stop doing that. If it's possible. That's not really helping me out. So got another 3 laps to run on this stint, and then afterwards I can move on to the next stint. I can certainly say you do have to use the brakes more when your tyres are wearing out. And I can certainly say at this point they do seem to be doing so right now. And that's kind of what seems to be happening at this moment in time. Because I am trying to make sure that my car not only stays out of the walls, but also manages to stay on the road. Basically. And so we are now 42 laps into this race. So another 8 laps to go in this part of the video, and then I can move on to part 2 afterwards. I'm pretty sure this race is going to be less than 3 hours long, from what I can see. I could do the full races if I really wanted to, but I don't think I really have the hardware I need to make that possible. At least not without having to spend a lot of time making sure that the video is exported and also fucking gets uploaded when I want it to. As I have now put the Mini Marcos 5 laps down. And I think he is in the wall. Or he was temporarily in the wall. I did not think I was running wide there, but I somehow am. So glad I was not running any wider, or else I would have been in the wall there, again. Yeah, I think it's probably going to be around less than 1.5 hours by the time we get to lap 50. Which is the lap where I aim to call it on this part of the video and then move on to the other part of the video. These are long races after all, so I do have to think about these things. It might also help if I budge my chair in. I think I might do that for the second half, but for the first half, I think I'm okay to more or less handle this, from what I can see. So we've got another lap to go after this one. Once I am finished here, then I can basically run 5 quick laps to end off the first stint. And having a sip of water from my bottle. Might be the last one I have before. How did I not clip that wall? That wall was so close to grabbing me. I was honestly just inches away from being caught out by that wall, but I somehow dodged it. Oh hey, we've now reached 400 miles in this championship. I never noticed that up until now. So I think in the second half, that's when we're going to pass 500 miles, from what I can see. So we've got one more lap to run on this worn set of boots. But I think I should be fine. The tank is now been used for over half of its capable distance. So I think it'll probably be around lap 60 when I refuel. Because my tank has just been so durable at this point. As we've now passed the 400 mile mark of this championship. I think when I looked on the GT fandom page for this event, I think it said the total number of miles you can run, I think, is 996. I think that probably is what the total distance is if you combine all 4 races together. So it's near enough to 1,000 miles basically. As I somehow avoid the death wall once again. However, one thing I'm not avoiding is my next pit stop, because my front tyres are once again dead. Really trying to hit my marks here with the pit entry line, and amazingly I do that. Still don't need any fuel yet. I just need the slicks, and then we'll be fine. My controller at the moment is caught up with my wire. This might take a second for me to figure out. I will get this resolved, but that's the problem I'm currently having. But anyway. So, that's now my third pit stop made of the day, and probably the last one I make in part 1, which means I will probably make another 3 pit stops in the second half of this race, as I'm now overlapping the Mini Marcos now for the 5th time. Unless it's a repeat of me overlapping him for the 4th time, but I don't think it is. So I've now overlapped him precisely 5 times. And yep, a wire is twisted in my controller, so I think I may need a second to get that twisted. Or untwisted, I should say. I'm thinking about whether or not I should pause the race just to untwist that wire, but I think because I only have 4 laps to go in this part of the video, I think I'm just going to tough it out. Unless I can somehow do something with my other hand to get it sorted. And so, I will now put the Fiat 500... I think this is now either 8 or 9 laps down. Again, if anyone is still watching at this point, then I really would appreciate it if someone actually is keeping track of the lap ticker at this point. And is able to tell me just how many laps precisely I am ahead of everyone else. Aside from the Alfa Romeo, because, well, I know how far ahead I am of him. And I have now sorted out my wiring issue, as I was able to tuck the wire underneath my desk again on my controller, and everything is as it should be again. So we're pretty much going to be halfway there by the time we get to the end of the next lap. Because half of 95 is 47.5, so we'll technically be at the halfway point by the time we get to the end of this lap. I will say that this race has taken a bit less time to get to the halfway point compared to Nürburgring. Of course, I will have to check and see at the start of the video just how many miles I was in to this event when I started this race. I think I drove over 300 miles at the Nürburgring, if I'm not mistaken. So I think up to this point I've got to be about, I would say, probably 96 miles into this race, depending on distance, or at least 94 miles, depending on how far it is I've driven up to this point. My tank still seems to be holding on pretty well. I am glad to say that backstretch is long enough for me to basically get a sip of water and also to ironically untug one of my wires in case they get stuck. I think that's actually pretty useful for me personally, if I have one of those problems. And so we're now halfway through this race. And up to this point, I am now 1 hour and 24 minutes into the event. And also less than an hour and 26 minutes into the video itself. And might have been a little too deep there because I got loose on that second entry at the bus stop, but I did still manage to get something decent out of it. I will try and see if I can actually go purple on this lap, because that would be really nice if I could go purple here. I think I do have the pace to do it, just to try and see if I can get one quick lap out of this. I am tempted to go for it, I really am. Trust me. This is definitely something I want to go for. If I can get it. And at the moment, I think I seem to be going pretty well around here. But we'll see how far up we are. I don't think I'm going to go purple on this lap or the next lap, but I think it was worth a try. Well, I still set a 1:39 at least. But anyway, this is pretty much our checkpoint lap for this segment, as I am now over halfway through race 2 up to this point. I don't think I'm going to go purple on this lap, but was certainly worth a try to see if I could. And I think I'm now going to put the Fiat 500 10 laps down at this point, if I'm not mistaken. He has got to be 10 laps down by this point in the event, as I give him a little bump from behind, and not really improving on my sector splits all that much. Although I am going a little bit higher with the revs to see if I can maybe eke some time out of this thing. But it looks like my lap time... But it looks like my personal best lap time at this point is probably going to stay untouched, from what I can see. So the Fiat 500 is now 10 laps down. And running a little bit wide. And there we go, that is now 50 laps. And all that took me was an hour and 27 minutes to get there. So that was part 1 of race 2 here at Opera Paris. Now let's move on to part 2.